Okay, everyone, my name is Connor. Today we're going to be going over an air layering workshop. So most of this material came from Young. It's in the pamphlet I had you guys print out. So I just made it more of a presentation style. So it's the same information, all from Young. So we're going to go through an introduction to air layering, why we're doing it, a little bit of science for the background and why it works. And I think this is some fundamental stuff into horticulture for plants in general. Once you understand some of these concepts, you can really utilize them in manipulating your tree. Then we'll go through what the materials you need, there's not very many, the technique, and then finally a demo. So what is air layering? It's essentially a free plant. So when you're air layering a plant, it's a method of propagation. So it's an asexual propagation method, which means there's not two plants. So the air layer that you're getting is genetically identical to the mother plant, essentially. So it's an effective propagation method for some plants that don't root readily from cuttings. So again, it's an asexual propagation process that often occurs naturally. In the wild, it happens when a low branch or a stem touches the ground, and this will take root. So you see this a lot in banyan trees and in tropical trees. Because it's an asexual process, the genetic material is directly transferred to the newly rooted stem, which may then be cut away from the parent plant. So they also do this, not directly air layering, but the same asexual process in apples. So every apple you get comes from the same genetic plant as the other apples within that cultivar, because apples will deviate very quickly from their traditional mother and father plants, making untasty or unsavory apples. So in bonsai, the goal of air laying is not limited to only propagation, but sometimes to improve the aesthetic of the tree. By strategically choosing where to air layer, the bonsai artist can significantly improve the nabari, so the root structure, the trunk movement, or completely change the overall design of the tree. So air layering is one of our 4 basic tools that we can use to manipulate trees. So we don't have a lot of tools that we can use in bonsai, so it's good to know all the mechanisms you can to manipulate the tree. Does anyone know the other bonsai tools that we have?
Grafting?
Yeah, grafting's one.
Wiring?
Yeah, wiring, grafting, air layering, and pruning is really the only 4 things that you can fundamentally do to change a tree, aside from growing, like non-horticulturally. So wiring and pruning are pretty fundamental. I find a lot of people are a little off-put through air layering. It seems like an ambitious task, but through this presentation you'll see it's quite easy. Grafting is a different story. I haven't dabbled into grafting yet, but like other things, it's highly species dependent. So water, nutrients, and dissolved gases are absorbed by the roots of the tree. This is how the tree uptakes its water. These are all transported to the foliage via the sapwood. So we're going to show you a schematic in the next couple of slides that shows you where the sapwood is. The leaves absorb carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and combine it with water and make sugars via photosynthesis. The sugar is then transported to other parts of the plant, including its roots, via the phloem. So these are 2 important layers in air layering that we're going to discuss later. The sugar is converted into ATP as an internal source of energy from the plant that is in all cellular functions, including growth, healing and repair, and reproduction. So, like animals, plants also have hormones that regulate immune functions, growth, and development. There's a direct interplay between the root growth and the foliage growth. So the leaves and the roots are all connected. As the atypical meristem, so this is the leader, as we consider in bonsai, the leader, the new shoot that's coming from the top. As it divides, it puts out growth into new branches. These will simultaneously produce a hormone known as auxin. So the auxins travel down from the foliage to the roots and corresponding and controlling the root growth. At the same time, hormones called cytokinins from the tips of the roots are being made at the roots and then travel up to the tips of the branches to stimulate growth of the foliage. So it's a balanced system between the growth at the bottom in the roots and the growth at the top. So understanding this relationship will help you succeed with air layering and other fundamental bonsai processes. So again, it's a balance. So the auxins are produced in the leaves and are travel through the phloem to the roots and other energy sinking things such as fruits. Simultaneously, the cytokinins are produced in the roots, and then those travel through the sapwood upwards into the leaves. So this process is why when you trunk chop a tree, it doesn't die, because there's still a bunch of cytokinins forming in the roots that are pushing up and creating new foliage. So this was kind of the idea of why you hear like you have to balance the tree. So when you root prune a tree, you should also trim the foliage. This is I would say a misnomer, but it's from this fundamental balance between hormones. Similarly, when you air layer a tree or you completely cut a tree off, it's going to attempt to form new roots because of the flow of auxins, the natural flow of auxins down the trunk. And we'll see this more in the next slide. So the pipe or the trunk has many layers. So starting from the outside, you have the bark. The bark is actually dead tissues of a phloem. So depending on the species, it builds up different characteristics of the bark from the phloem. So the phloem is a thin, spongy layer of tubes that carry the dissolved sugars and growth hormone from the leaves to the other parts of the tree. So this is the layer that's carrying the auxins. The cambium is like a thin in-between layer. It's not responsible for any transport up or down. It's you can kind of think of it as a stem cell layer. So it's growing both the phloem and the sapwood. So this is important why we have to remove the cambium when we do air layers, which I'll discuss more. Because if you leave some of the cambium, it's going to try to make more phloem, and then you're defeating the air layer process. The sapwood is the active part of the wood. I forget the actual term for the whole layer, but it's the active part where the heartwood is no longer active.
Is that the xylem?
Xylem, that's exactly, yeah. The active part of the tree's wood, through which water and minerals are conducted from the roots to the leaves. So this is what's carrying the cytokinins up. So this is why when we're air layering, it's essentially like taking cutting, but you still have all of the sugar, the minerals and water going to the cutting. So like I said, sugars and hormones are brought down to the roots from the crown via the phloem to facilitate further root growth. If the flow is disrupted at any point in this journey, the sugars and hormones will be concentrated at the point of disruption. These conditions are right. This concentration of hormones will trigger new roots to form at that location. The cambium layer, like I said, is the thin reproductive membrane that produces new cells to create new phloem and new sapwood. Therefore, in order to create this distribution point, you need to completely disrupt the flow of the phloem and remove the cambium so it doesn't create more phloem. So what are these right conditions? Moisture is highly key. You need it to create a conducive environment for root development, not too wet or the new roots will rot. Darkness is imperative for root growth. Root formation is adverse to light, and this is because of the auxins. The auxins, when they're struck with UV or other high intensity light, they degrade the hormones itself. So the same condition that they want shade is also because of how the auxins are reacting with the light. The other one is time. Some species will callus and form new roots within a few weeks, while others can take up to 2 years. So this is highly species dependent. Easy ones are the tropicals, the ficus, And so in some of the elms, they can take anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks, so 2 months. Some of our broadleaf deciduous maples and other deciduous trees will take the full 3 to 4 months of the summer, where some of the conifers will actually take 2 years. So the first year you'll be building up those auxins around the ring, and then in the next spring you're hoping for roots to sprout out of that layer. So for tropicals, air layering can be done at any time as long as you have good conditions. So you can start at midwinter as long as you have high humidity and you have good light. For temperate trees, it's best done during the growing season. If there's no foliage growth during dormancy, then there's nothing to produce roots. So I actually found with the maple that we're going to be looking at, I started the air layer before the leaves sprout. So the buds were active, but there's no extended foliage. And I was pretty adverse to this technique at first because I thought you needed leaves, like hard set off leaves, so not new tender growth, but stuff that's been exposed to UV and is growing, in order to produce the auxins at the cutoff point. But it's actually the tree above your cutoff point is still being fed through the sapwood. So those buds were gonna bud regardless. And I found that I didn't do a comparative study, but I think this one put out a lot faster roots in a lot shorter amount of time. So for materials, it's a wide variety of stuff you can use. There's many methods. So we're going to be doing 2 methods that I use depending on the situation. So you need a plant that you want to propagate. You need a sharp knife, a grafting knife. I use a dissection knife because I had it. You need sphagnum moss, which I have some in the bag. You should pre-soak the moss. A piece of plastic to wrap or to hold the moss around the air layer. A piece of aluminum foil or dark plastic to wrap around that, as I said, they don't like light. And you need some scissors to work that material. Water, rooting hormone, so this is what the auxins. So they come in generally three different categories, and they're numbered 1, 2, and 3. And that's related to the amount of this hormone auxin. It's IBA, how much is in it. So I generally use 2 or 3 for everything. I have one, I don't know where I got it from. But you use the higher number when it's the more difficult the species. So through your research, you find that things don't root as well. So hardwood cuttings, conifers, like shimpakus, then you use a 3. It's things that root much more easily, like ficus, which don't even need rooting hormone, then you use a 1. Alternatively, I found it very interesting that you can use willow water, so willow extract. So willow is a really interesting tree in the fact that it has naturally high levels of these auxins. So natives used to use a willow extract as their rooting hormone. It's called willow water. So they would dissolve or extract some of the auxins from the cambium or the soft material of the tree, and then dip other cuttings into that as a propagation technique. It's important to sterilize your equipment, mostly the knife that you're using to cut the tissue, especially if you're doing many. Same thing with cuttings, because you don't want to transfer any sort of disease into the internals of the plant. So it's a really susceptible barrier. So you can use alcohol, Windex, or any sort of thing to fire sterilize it. If the ball is tight around the package, like you'll see through the technique, then you're going to need a syringe or an easy way to get water into your air laying moss package. So I don't like to do that because I like to just water overhead. So I leave all my air layers really open to the front, so it's essentially a pot. And that's why I brought a pot, because I'm going to show you that you can just keep your moss in a pot and hang it off the tree. So there's many different ways to skin a cat. So the first step is to disinfect your knife with alcohol or whatever you're using. Make 2 parallel cuts around. So this distance right here is going to be, they say it's proportional to the thickness of your trunk. What you're trying to do with a larger distance is avoid the cambium jumping and creating a bridge. This is similar situation as why I mentioned you have to remove all of the cambium, because if you don't, the plant wants to move its auxins all the way down to its roots. So it's going to try its best. So it's good to maybe, I normally do like a 1 to 1.5 inch strip generally. I don't really change it with the thickness of the trunk. So then you're going to completely remove all of the bark, the phloem, and the cambium. So the cambium is a green layer. So you're gonna cut until you see what you think is wood. So you can't go too deep unless you go right in half, essentially. One of the biggest things is how do I know when I've gone too far, or when I've gone far enough. So you want to make sure all the cambium layer is gone. So then you're going to apply some rooting hormone. So as I mentioned, it comes in numbers 1 through 3. 3 for hardwood, 2 for softwood, and 1 for things that cut a little bit easier. So you're going to dust. The area of business is this top border. Down here, nothing's really going to happen. All the auxins are going to build up here. So you want to dust the exposed cambium layer along the top edge. So you're going to apply a handful of damp moss to the envelope and wrap it or secure it in a ball in some way. So this diagram uses string. This is too many steps for me, so we're going to see when we do it that it's not going to be this complicated. So you wrap the moss ball, wrap it in something that will hold it, and then wrap it in something that will keep it away from, or keep it in shade. So then you're going to check in periodically for the formation of roots. So you're going to see roots along the bottom and along the outsides. So the roots are going to come off in your cut, so your cut's somewhere in here, and they're going to come out and then down. So you want to, while you're watering, you want to be checking for roots. So once you're satisfied that there's an adequate amount of roots you have developed for the layer to sustain life on its own, this is the tricky part. So this is dependent on how much foliage is above the air layer. So if you have a full tree above the air layer, you're going to need a lot of roots to support that full tree. This also comes into play where some people say you should cut down the top after you've taken off the air layer. Some people say you should leave it, and it goes back to the balance. It depends if you want to wait for it to naturally die off, or you're confident in your decision about how many roots that are needed to fuel the foliage. So it's really an experience game, because it's also going to vary with each species. Yeah, you can cut it off with secateurs, loppers, or depending on whatever size it is. So the next, you're going to unwrap the plastic around the moss ball. Don't remove any of the moss right away, because these new roots are fragile and delicate. So you're going to plant the whole moss ball in your choice of either more moss, bonsai soil, whatever you have at your availability. You want to keep a medium that holds more water relative to your regular mix. If you're doing this on tropical trees during the summer, then reduce the leaf mass by half, or keep it in a shaded area. You could also, if you don't have a lot of roots, then you're going to want to keep the leaves moist to keep the humidity high. So after you remove the air layer, you're going to want to protect the tree similar as how you would protect something you just collected. Well watered, in partial shade, and in high humidity. So everything's love and life right now in the high humidity reigning temperatures that we're getting. Like, I'm sure everyone's tropicals are just exploding. So now would be a good time depending on the root mass available. Okay, so that's it. We're going to do demo time. So I have this Sarissa. I also have a previous air layer. So this is a air layer of an air layer. So last year we also did an air layering demo where Hong air layered a large clump ficus that he had. So there was 5 air layers given out. I didn't really know what to do with this, so I just did another air layer. So this didn't take very long at all. I probably started this I started it indoors, so probably March or April, and I cut this off before I went outside. And you can see from the bottom that there's already roots coming out the bottom of the basket, and there's probably about an inch or 2 of new growth coming off this.
It's really healthy.
Yeah, I really like these baskets. They're doing really good for me. So that's an air layer that was just cut off. This is an air layer in progress. So I guess just come take a look when we go for the demo. But you can see roots coming out of the bottom. So the chopstick and stuff were just to hold up the ball because it was quite heavy, and aluminum foil doesn't have a lot of rigidity. But what I've been doing with my air layers now, or what I did with this one, is once they've filled up the first ball you put around them, so once they fill up this first ball, I remove the ball, check that I have, check how much roots I have, and then I double up the volume. Essentially what you're doing is repotting your air layer when it's still in a tree. So you want to give your air layer as much room to grow new roots. So by doubling it up, you're giving it a bigger head start before you cut it off. So we're going to air layer this Sarissa. We're going to put 2 air layers, I think. We'll try. So first, we're going to have to pick a spot. So this tree is pretty straight. It doesn't have any curvature. It doesn't have any reverse taper. I'm not trying to correct anything. I want it much smaller, and I can't throw out plants. So I'm gonna air layer it down. It's the same thing with the maple. I didn't want it that tall, so instead of just cutting it off and going into the compost, I air layered them. So there's a big head of growth right here. So I think that's where I'm gonna put the first air layer. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make space, because you need an inch or so. So these are nice branches, but they're gonna have to go. And I found these take really well from cutting, so feel free to take as many and try if you want.
So did you buy this from the nursery, or did you air layer this?
This was a cutting.
Oh, was it cutting?
This was a cutting, probably this size.
From Hong?
No, so I've had horrible luck with these actually. So I got these one from Tropical Expressions in Hamilton, and I tried twice. Every time I brought one of these home, they died. But as they were dying, I took cuttings from the remaining green growth, and all my cuttings lived. So for some reason I think it's because, so they water every day, and it's very humid in there. So the transition from their environment to where I was keeping it, they didn't like it. So these like humidity. Okay, so I've got out this much. This pot may be a little big, so maybe we'll try it down here. But I like the pot method. It's easier and it's more sturdy compared to the plastic wrap and or aluminum foil. So now all I'm gonna do is carefully, I don't even like making the 2 perpendicular cuts. I just start scraping on one side, and then I rotate it like a corn on the cob and just scrape off all the bark. So you can see the green, the bright green layer, that's a cadmium. So you want to remove all of that. You don't want any green left. So there's a limitation on how young you can do plants because they need to have some sapwood.
And are you being really careful to eliminate as little of the sapwood as possible? I mean, is it a very delicate thing in terms of how deep to go?
No, the sapwood is a pretty big layer. It's one of the bigger layers, and it's pretty voluminous, so it's a big pipe. So you don't want to. I wouldn't want to go all the way into the heartwood, and you want to leave it enough to be sturdy. So because it's a process controlled by gravity, the hormones will just they'll stack up on the lowest point in the layer. So if you have a tree that's on an angle like this, then your top layer you want to make parallel to the ground, not parallel to the branch. You mentioned this that happened to your ginkgo, right? Like all the roots came out right in the lower
That's
portion.
right. So if the branch is on, like for example, if you air layer this, you won't get root on the top. You only get root on the bottom. But if you air layer this section, you will get root all the way around.
So if this is your bark out here, and then you have your phloem, I don't even want to try to spell it, and then your cambium here. So when you cut into this level, like Jung just mentioned, all the auxins, they build up here. So there's a lot of auxins that are unable to continue down to the roots. So this buildup of auxins among the other cellular activity causes a big bulge here. And then out of the bulge comes the roots because of the built up auxins. So in conifers, you'll spend a whole year just building up this this callus. So I try not to dip from the bottle because you'll transmit pathogens. So this is kind of just a working amount. But then you just brush the top bark area. I even put some around the sphagnum moss just for fun.
Yeah.
So just the top part.
Yeah, because that's where all the buildup is.
So the rooting hormone actually won't do anything until the callus forms. Because it's the callus that contacts with the rooting hormone that will stimulate the root growth. So really, if you do a lot of syringing and flush that rooting hormone out of that zone before the callus, then it's not going to do anything.
The buildup.
Yeah. So sometime if you really want better success, don't brush it on right away and let it callus first. So check periodically to see the callusing. Once you have callusing, then brush.
There's a flag.
Haphazardly filled bundle of sphagnum moss.
You wet the moss already.
Yeah, so it was pre-soaked. It holds a lot of water. Like there's probably, yeah. It's like a natural sponge. This stuff's really good. I recommend getting a dried brick of this and then just using it as you need it.
So there's been some literature, like there is some kind of spore within it that can be toxic if you throw it by your hand, yeah. But I don't know, it's disputable. I touch it with my hand for 10 years and I'm still here.
Slow death.
It's a slow death by rubber.
So you don't have to use sphagnum moss. You can put other types of media in it, like peat or pro-mix or anything along those lines. You just have to keep it well watered. Like you can see that mine are growing green on the top.
In your presentation, you had a layer, I think, in the image of plastic wrap of some sort, and then the tin foil. So, but that's not what you're doing now.
Yeah, I don't like the double layer. It's just I have big clumsy hands. They're not even that large, but like then you have to take 2 off to inspect it. I just like the tinfoil does both. It adds some structural integrity compared to a plastic film, and it blocks light.
Both will work.
Okay.
Connor, you mentioned for junipers that you could use wire instead of cutting.
Yeah, so you can get the same effect with tourniquet, is what it's referred to. I've never personally used that method. For some reason, it is recommended for conifers more than.
Wow, too.
Put them in water,
Yeah.
along with a piece of willow. You really know.
I will take some
cut
of
the
these
bottom
and
out of this.
retry them.
Yeah.
We'll
That's
just
right.
sit.
Goes
Never
around
say
the-
die.
Like I would just go in there and just make sure it's
I do have a belt jaw sitting up in
We'll retry them
I
again.
was gonna use it for
And just,
orcas, but my
Some people
orca was
do
too
call it
big.
Little piece of wire.
That's a good idea to put it in there.
But these ones, when you see the white, you see, so they have to.
This
And
is
then how do you hold the pot together, Connor?
The needle is.
Just with a small bit of wire around the top.
Oh, okay, so you're tying it together
Yeah.
with wire. I see.
And then, like, if you have a bigger pot, you need more wire, but this will be fine, just
but
because you try not to move them as much as possible.
These are the same as
last year's needle.
but they are a lot slower growing.
So that's a little more sturdy,
Almost.
a little more even compared to the.
The moss.
You know, further back, but from the,
Yeah, this actually, if you give it a lot of light.
So,
I thinned this out.
Will turn on.
I'm trying, yeah. But 2 of the branches already died off the top, so
And then
I
even-
think I did it for those.
Yeah.
Even if you stress,
See, there's.
much
longer needles than the
or you.
In 2 years, they'll recycle.
I keep going away from zero, so.